What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the finale of the Turbo K24 swap Subaru BRZ build. As you can tell, I've already got it back in the house, so we're filming the intro after the video, but stick around because we've got to talk about the low oil pressure, talk about getting the engine back in, do all of the final dyno tuning, and see how much power this thing makes. All right, so we're back here at the shop where the car is located, and it turns out that the problem is actually rather simple and potentially, kind of is sort of my fault for not running an oil cooler like from the beginning, like from the jump, because the reason we're having low oil pressure is because of my oil sandwich plate. Now, the plate, like the sandwich plate adapter itself, is not necessarily the problem, but as I was rushing to get the build done and I was trying to get to the Cosmic Drift event and all of that, I basically said to myself, I don't need to have an oil cooler done in order to tune the car and basically finish it. I can install the oil cooler later, it'll be fine. Because of the fact that my oil sandwich plate has a thermostat, which is typically what you would want for an oil cooler, the thermostat doesn't open until the oil reaches a certain temperature. So basically, when the oil is cold, it doesn't need to flow through the oil cooler, but then once it gets up to temp where it does need to be cooled, the thermostat opens up and it would loop through the oil cooler.
So because of the fact that I did not run my oil cooler lines, I had the other two ports plugged. So if you recall, I had the Dash 4 turbo oil feed coming off of this, and the plan was to use the other two ports for the oil cooler. But because of the fact that I had those two ports plugged, when the oil got up to temp and the thermostat opened up, basically it was blocking this one port, and because there was no oil return to the system, because I had those blocked, the oil wasn't looping around. Essentially, the oil was just getting hung up in this sandwich plate adapter. Now, it does have a small amount of bypass, and it was allowing some oil flow.
And because there was a bypass, some of the oil was able to make its way back down into the pan, which means that we weren't starving the engine of oil, which is good, but the small amount of bypass that is inherently built in is not enough to maintain full oil pressure if you're not. It's like if you were to install an oil sandwich plate and block all of the ports. Like, it's just a bad idea. So it's my fault for not running an oil cooler, but obviously there's some things that kind of go into why it's been sitting here for so long. But obviously, because you can see that the engine is on the ground and it's all reassembled. It was, transmission off, it was on a stand, oil pan off. While it was off, because we hit low oil pressure, we wanted to check the bearings. We checked all of the bearings. They looked like there's a little bit of wear, but it's a used engine. It's not anything excessive. It's not anything concerning. It's kind of what you would expect from an engine with 50 to 100,000 miles. So now that that is more or less resolved, they are going to reinstall the engine in the car. So over the next day or two, they're going to be working on reinstalling the engine. They've actually already dropped the subframe, because the way that they're going to reinstall it, instead of just slotting the transmission down and getting the engine to fit into place, they are just going to drop the subframe, mount the engine, and then essentially lower the car back down onto the subframe, which is kind of a super common thing to do on Hondas anyway. So kind of fitting Honda engine, Honda removal and reinstallation method. So tomorrow, the day after that, they're going to work on getting the engine back in, and then most likely next week we're going to be back for tuning. So we're getting so close. One thing that I do want to mention, in the last video, I was saying that we're not hitting our target boost for whatever reason. We didn't really know exactly why that was, but we suspect that it is the wastegate that I was running. The wastegate is from Pulsar, so it's kind of it's a knockoff tile. It's not a legit brand wastegate. So we're gonna get a TurboSmart, install the TurboSmart on there, and that should pretty much fix the lack of boost issue. So if you recall, on 8 PSI and with no VTEC actuation, we made 330 at the rear wheels. So I'm willing to bet that with VTEC active and 12 PSI of boost instead of 8, we should be able to hit that 400 number. So roughly a week from now, hopefully no later than that, we're gonna be tuning. And so we'll come back to you guys when we get to tuning. All right, boys and girls, we're back. It's go time. Engine's back in. Everything's basically ready to go. He's already started it up, bled the coolant, checked the oil pressure, although we won't really know if the problem is fixed until we kind of get it going. So yeah, let me show you some of the changes that were done and basically where we're at before we start tuning. All right, so we got all the fans running in here. It's a little noisy. So everything's back in. Everything's pretty much ready to run. One of the fixes that they made was to my blow-off valve pressure reference. So if you guys recall, I had cut this brake booster line in the wrong spot and had to replace this little check valve, and then I had the T in this line which was going to the blow-off valve. That was all very dirty looking, so we put on this little 90-degree fitting, and so we still have our pressure to the brake master cylinder, or not master cylinder, the brake booster, and we've also got our new line to our blow-off valve. And as far as the wastegate goes, we were struggling to make the proper amount of boost. So we replaced the Pulsar wastegate with a TurboSmart Hypergate 45 millimeter. This guy right down here, right here, the purple bit, right? And so we put for the, what do you call it? The oil sandwich plate. They put a loop fitting, which again, this is gonna be hard to see. They put a little 180 loop between here and the bottom fitting. So this just has a little loop on it. Yep, this guy right here, you can see that. So hopefully that's gonna be the solution for the oil pressure. Now, it is raining like crazy, so there's a little bit of water in the engine bay, and the floors here at ARD are pretty slick, so we're gonna have to be a little bit careful. As far as I can tell, everything's back in, ready to go, ready to run, ready to finish the tune. So Phil's gonna come back over and sort of remap, just get everything set back up from a base level, and it's already got, obviously, a few hours of tuning on it, so hopefully we just need to make sure everything's good, make sure our oil pressure is good once the temperature comes up and that sandwich plate does what it does, and hope we can make some power and potentially drive this thing home. The exhaust rattles really bad on D-cell. I need to take that back to heat lighting and have them weld on a little bracket so it holds it off the underside of the undercarriage, because that's on D-cell, when it gets into a certain RPM range, you can hear that rattle. It's just the exhaust touching the underside of the body, so got to get that fixed, but everything seems to be going okay. Just kind of getting it worked up, making sure oil pressure and oil temp is up, and that we can basically verify that the oil pressure is good. All right, so we've been able to get in some really good runs. The problem is because of how wet it is, because it's been raining for the last like 3 days straight. The problem is that the dyno is wet. And so basically once he goes full load on the engine, it's spinning tires on the dyno. And so it's not really like, you'll hear the RPMs come up and like hold because it's just spinning tire trying to sort of catch up to the dyno speed. And then once it grips, it goes. So we do have the Turbo Smart wastegate in there now. It is capping out right at like 9.9 PSI. It has a 12-pound spring and it's only getting right up to about 10. And the reason that he thinks that it's doing this is because of the fact that my pressure reference to open the wastegate is right after the compressor housing. So pretty much like 2 inches off of where it's, you know, creating boost into the intake piping, that's where the reference is. And so there is some pressure drop across the intercooler. And so say the wastegate's opening at 12, it's losing about 2 PSI through all of the piping to actually get to the intake manifold and to the map sensor. So what he's going to try right now is actually just basically just creating the pressure reference for the wastegate by teeing off of the blow-off valve, which is essentially the intake manifold pressure, because the blow-off valve reads from the intake manifold. So he's going to create a tee off of the blow-off valve over to the wastegate and see if the wastegate will actually open right at or closer to 12 PSI. But even with wheels spinning on the dyno and 10-ish PSI with VTEC actuating, because we have good proper oil pressure now, we made 355 at the rear wheels, which is not like nothing to sneeze at, especially in a car this light. However, we're trying to hit that 400, and we're only running to about 7,000 RPM. So we're gonna try and take it 7,500, probably 78 is about the max that I'm sort of comfortable with. The Type S oil pump that's in there is good for 82, 8,300 RPM. I've seen, you know, K-Series guys run up to, you know, above 8,000 RPM on those Type S oil pumps. So we're gonna try and take it up to about 7,800. We're gonna fool around with our wastegate pressure reference for a little while and see if we can get the wastegate to open up a little bit later at a slightly higher pressure. And we'll see what we can get. So we put that sort of T in place on the blow-off valve to basically try and move the pressure reference over closer to the intake side so that the wastegate would open up a little bit later. But after those couple of pulls, we're still seeing only like 10 PSI at the intake manifold. So we're going to switch from a 12-pound spring to a 14 and hope that with that like 2-ish pound pressure loss across the intercooler piping with the 14-pound spring, we'll see roughly 12 at the intake manifold. All right, well, we've kind of hit a bit of a dead end. Essentially, it's only making 10 pounds of boost. That's the most we could get it to make. We hooked up a boost leak tester, and I guess he's basically just trying to smooth out the curve at this point. So we went from a 12-pound spring up to a 14-pound spring, and didn't really see much change at all. It's like 9.9, 10 PSI of boost. The curve, the boost curve, like starts coming up, and by 4,000 RPM, it's pegged at 10 PSI, and it just runs 10 all the way to red line. So it's like something's going on, because we've had 2 different wastegates on there with a variety of springs in both, and something's not adding up. Yeah, kind of stinks. But so we had the red line set at 7,000. We're going to set it a little bit higher, and basically we're just going to start smoothing out the curve and trying to get it dialed in, because at this point I wanted to make 400 so bad, but it's all like it's spinning the tires on the dyno and the thing's gonna be rowdy. It's light, fast, it's making, I don't know how much torque it's making, but in the 300s for torque. So yeah, I don't know if we're gonna hit our 400 target, but it's a $400. So it's, you know, it's a brand new out of the box Turbo Smart Hypergate 45mm. We tried the 7 and 5 PSI springs together to get 12, and it was capped at 10. Took those out, put in a single 14-pound spring, capped at 10. So something's just not quite right. But at this point, we're gonna try and, you know, up the red line. Bug on the lens. We're gonna up the red line and just try and smooth it out, make it a nice even power band, and obviously when the VTEC kicks in, it'll be, you know, it'll adjust the curve. But right now, because we're spinning on the dyno, the curve is like all over the place, and I'm sure I will have put some clips in there of the curve at some point. But yeah, at least it stopped raining. the dyno tuning finished, we ended up making 365 horsepower to the rear wheels. Now, it's not quite the 400 that I was hoping for, but that is more than enough to have a lot of fun in a car as light as this one. By taking the FA20 out and putting in the K24, we saved about 150 pounds off the nose of the car. So potentially, you know, shifting that weight balance a little bit more towards that 50-50 that everybody's looking for. So after the dyno tuning, I did have the car towed from the shop back to my house because the registration on this is about 3 years out of date. It's been sitting in a garage on jack stands and it hasn't been going on the road, so there's really no reason for me to keep updating the sticker on the car. Now, could I have done the registration ahead of time so that I could have driven it home? Yes, and I probably should have done that. But anyway, I had it towed back to the house, we got this thing warmed up, and we went for our first test drive.
All right, guys, got the car home, ready to go for the first test drive. The temps are coming up. They're not perfect yet, so we're gonna be a little bit slow with it. We're not gonna go crazy right off the rip. Dude, I can't believe this is real. This is insane. So, just gonna kind of drive around a little bit, learn the clutch. Just gonna take it around the neighborhood once or twice. The clutch engages very high in the engagement. These windows up. Holy, this thing shakes. Driving. This is insane. Oh my God, I cannot believe this. 2.5 years of work to get this baby to run. Alright, I think we're at the point where comfortable to open her up a little bit. Get her under boost, just a hair. Obviously, but I just wanted to give you guys kind of a little first look. Man, this is insane. So that pretty much wraps up the engine swap part of this build series. We've got a lot more stuff coming for this thing in the future, so make sure you guys stick around. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel so you can see everything else that we're going to do, including big brake kit, cage, seats, harnesses, the whole nine, and everything else. And until next time, build your dreams.